Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, where we focus on how authors found success, looking at strategies that have taken them to the top of the bestseller charts, as well as what they've learned from their mistakes. Because being an indie author is more than knowing the latest marketing trend. It's about being innovative and creative and learning from your mistakes.
Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. I'm Sara Rosette.
And I'm Jami Albright. And this week on the show we have
Clare C. Marshall.
We do. And I hear it was a great interview.
It was. We had a really good interview.
Yeah, Sara had to do it by herself because my grandson got sick and I had to take him to the doctor because his mom had to work. And so I couldn't be there. And I'm really bummed because I heard it was great.
Yeah, but it was good. We missed you.
But thanks.
But we talked about selling in person, and Clare does a whole bunch of like festivals, craft shows, things where maybe you wouldn't normally sell books, but she does a lot of in-person selling. And so we talked about like what all is involved with that, how to set up a booth so that it looks attractive, kind of applying to get into these things. And then she had a lot of really good tips on interacting with people one-on-one. And just great. Like how to approach people and draw them in. And it was just very interesting because, I'm not a big one-on-one selling person, but as you do, if you are a writer, you're going to have opportunities to meet people one-on-one and sell your book and pitch your book. And I think it'll be really helpful.
Right. Well, I'm bummed that I wasn't on the call because I am going to be doing this next year at a signing and stuff, maybe a couple of signings. But I'll be listening and I'm going to look. She's sending pictures too, right? That were of her booth. And
yeah, she had some great ideas on how to set up her booth. And I asked her if she could send us some pictures. So there'll be some in the show notes.
Yeah.
And if I'm on it, I'll try and post them in the group. I may
great.
Totally space out, but I'll try and put them in the group as well.
Okay, that'd be great. So what's been going on with you?
So this week I've actually gotten a lot of writing done. So last week I was all down. I was like, I didn't get as much writing done as I wanted. But this week I'm feeling better and I'm making progress. And so that's going well. And I don't know, things have just settled down a little bit. The world is still crazy, but I am getting some work done. Good. But on that note, we've had a whole bunch of people reply about the post that we had about helping out Ukrainians. And I wanted to mention one group. It's in the link in the document with all the stuff. And it's Knitting for Ukraine. And I
love it.
Cool thing.
Love it.
I think it's just hats and mittens, I think is all in the colors of the Ukrainian flag. And then they're sending them to refugees. So people are just doing all kinds of stuff. And it's they are very encouraging. Yeah. So that's going on. And then I found a very good podcast. I don't know if you'll be interested in it, but if anybody likes Jane Austen, it is a podcast and it's dedicated to, it's called The Thing About Austen. And they take one item for each podcast. So it might be like Mr. Darcy's portrait or the Marianne's dead leaves. And they just talk about that and what it means in the story. And I mean, it's just very interesting. And I'm such a history
I love it.
And yeah, it's fascinating. Like the one about Marianne's dead leaves was so funny. And that's like one of the favorite lines for me from Austen is like, she's going on about these wonderful dead leaves. And I'm like, that is just hilarious. Because, that's so her. Yeah. But, so anyway, you can find that on, any podcast app and they have lots. I've been binging the whole back list. And the other thing about it is if you go to their Instagram, their branding is so good. It's just so good. Yeah. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
Right. Yeah, we could probably learn some lessons from them. Well, I not much. I had given myself a few days to, jet lag and all of that to get back. Plus the time change that has the combo has kind of kicked my butt. Like at 8:00 at night, I am ready to go to bed. I make myself stay up till 9. And then I'm sleeping until 6 or 7, so I'm getting a lot of sleep. But anyway, then my grandson got sick, and I had to keep him a couple of days, and so we haven't done much around here. But while I was gone, I did realize there was a there was a conflict issue with my book. Like like motivation and conflict just wasn't as strong as I wanted it to be. And so I've been thinking about that while I was gone. And then yesterday I got like, I think I fixed it in my head. I just have to put it on paper. So, probably, I mean, I wrote a little bit today, but today's Friday, but, I'm going to jump back in and get going. But like I said, I've had him and he's wonderful and lovely but he's 2 and I'm old and
it's a lot of work.
Exhausting. Yeah. But I did watch The Adam Project. Have y'all seen that? I mean, it's on Netflix. It's really great. Really great. Okay. I know a lot of people have seen it, but I don't know. There was just something about it that I just really loved. And so that was fun, but I haven't really done much else. I've done some of my Italian cooking when I've set up at home, some of the recipes that I learned. However, my dough isn't really coming out. Well, it was the dough last night. 2 nights ago, it was the sauce wasn't exactly right. So, but I think I know what I did, and so I'm going to try again next week. And
so that is interesting because like when we went to Italy, when we came back, we tried to make pizza and it was just not really as good.
Well, because the ingredients aren't as good.
Yes. I had people tell us it's the ingredients are not the same as what you can get there. And I knew people that would go there, buy flour and bring it back so they could have the correct flour.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I know it's true. And yesterday I went to the grocery store. My husband does the grocery shopping, but I went because I was making this thing. And as I'm walking down the aisles, like I'm overwhelmed because, in Europe and in Italy, the parts of Italy we were in particularly, there's just, that's one thing I was really overwhelmed with when I was there is just how excessive parts of our lives are here in the States. And food's one of those things. Yeah. Because while everywhere in Italy, like you can get food, and when you sit down to have a drink, they bring you a snack. You don't even have to ask for it. It's just
our kind of place.
It's almost like chips and hot sauce, but it's just a snack, and it can be anything. But everything there it's almost bite size. Like, it's just enough. It's not excessive. It's not. And I was overwhelmed at the grocery store yesterday. Like, there's too much stuff. Exactly. I just need a few things. And so I really hope I can kind of continue to kind of incorporate that lack of excess in my thinking.
It's like a culture shock. Isn't
it? It is. Yeah, and I really love that when I was there. For those of you who've traveled to Europe before, I'm sure you're like, whatever, Jami. But I mean, I'm 58 and I just traveled to Europe for the first time. So I'm just like, oh my gosh, I really did love that part of their lifestyle. Yeah. So anyway,
and everything's so that's fresh.
Yes. Yeah. It's so good.
Yeah. So going back to the thinking about your plot and mulling things over, I think that's work and that takes time. And I've been doing the same thing. And I was like, this week I'm getting near the end of the book and it's not, I don't have a plot hole. Mm-hmm. I just had like too many things happening all at once, too many reveals like coming together at the end. And I was like, I have a plot kink, like, or something. I don't know. It's like everything's there, but it's too much. I've got to spread it out.
Right.
So I've been doing that this week. And I think that sometimes you have to think about it to figure it out and then write it.
Right. So I was laying down. I say laying down. That's not correct. I think it's lying down. But I'm from Texas and I'm a hick. And I was in the bed, but I was just napping, but I wasn't really. And my husband kind of poked his head in the room, and I was like, I'm thinking, I'm working. I'm thinking about a story. He was like, yeah, I wish I had that job. But it is true. I think I remember Harlan Coben saying that one time. He's a great thriller writer, and he says, my wife, the part of my job she hates is when I nap when I work horizontally, because it looks like I'm napping, but I'm really thinking, and I'm like,
but you're working hard.
Yeah, exactly. So
That's
anyway,
right.
yeah, but we should probably get on with the interview, and I hope everybody's doing well, and we'll,
and if you have any other ways to help out with Ukraine, let us know.
Let us know. Yeah.
We will be happy to add them to the list.
Oh, that does remind me. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm kind of scattered. But Sky Warren put together an anthology. It's #1 in the Kindle store today. It's called Nightingale. So if you like romance, you might go check that out. Even if you don't like romance, you might check that out because all the proceeds are going to Ukrainian relief. So
perfect. Okay, we'll put a link.
Sounds all right. Great.
All right. Well, here is Clare.
Yes.
Hello. We have Clare C. Marshall with us today. Hi, Clare. How are you?
Hi. How are you?
We are good. We're so glad to talk to you today.
Well, I'm very happy to be here.
Well, let me read your bio and we'll jump right into the questions. Clare C. Marshall grew up in rural Nova Scotia with very little television and dial-up internet, and yet she turned out okay. She is the founder and author-publisher behind Variant Press, where she publishes young adult science fiction, fantasy, and horror novels. When she's not writing or fiddling up a storm, she enjoys computer games and making silly noises at her 2 cats, Pinecone and Pavlova. She lives in Calgary with her husband.
Sure do.
Bio. So much to dig into there. We definitely need to talk about science fiction and horror while we're chatting, because we've had people in our Facebook group say they want to talk to more horror authors. So
oh boy,
maybe we'll throw in a question about that if we have time.
Sure.
Okay. So tell us, how did you get into writing?
Well, I have always been a writer ever since I was little. I was the little girl in the corner, writing on loose leaf, pages and pages and pages of stories. I was really supported and encouraged by my parents and my classmates and my teachers. And I just always assumed that, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a writer. I wrote 120,000 word novels when I was a teen.
Wow.
And again, not having a lot of television, only having, the bare minimum of internet, I think also kind of helped, because I would just go home from school and I would write, pages after school and do my homework. And it just became part of the routine. And through this, I also learned about querying and publishers. And so I was already querying when I was 15 years old, being I wrote this long novel. And of course, publishers were oh, that's interesting, but polite rejection and warranted, of course, my writing was not up to snuff to be published at all. But then I went to school for journalism, and then I went into a publishing course and started doing freelance work in and around publishing. And I did this for the express reason of I'm going to have my own publishing brand. I'm going to publish my own books, and because I wanted to do it in a particular way. And 10 years later, it's 2011 years, 11 years later, here we are.
Wow. So you pretty much knew from the beginning that you wanted to be in control and you wanted to be indie, basically.
Yes. Yeah. And that was back in 2009, 2008 was when I first started looking into indie publishing. And that was kind of when it was not really taboo, but that's when people were starting to talk more openly about it. And here's how I did it. And Amazon Kindle only just came out in 2009, 2010. Wow. So it was just sort of that beginning stages. And I scoured the internet for any information that I could find about publishing. And I was in the middle of my journalism program at the time. And I was I'm not going to be a journalist. and a lot of different things happened at that time where, in 2008, the market crash and the recession, all that. And it seemed there was a narrative shift in what our professors were telling us at university, because I had assumed that I would go to university and get some kind of job. And I was told that, with a journalism degree, at least I would have like almost a trade and a set of skills that I could use. I could go be a journalist or work in some kind of journalism publishing, or I could be in marketing or communication or whatever. But the narrative seemed to switch and be like, there are no jobs for you.
Clearly, you're on your own. Good luck.
Yeah. And that's when I was like, oh no. Yeah. And I got very interested in like, oh, maybe I could start a business, or maybe I should look more deeply into what I actually like to do, which is write fiction, and try and publish that. So I actually almost I was very seriously considering dropping out of university to start a publishing company, which my parents were like, maybe don't quite do that. Maybe finish your school. And so I found this publishing program at Humber College, which required a degree. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to finish my journalism degree, and then I'm going to go into this publishing program, and then I'm going to start my own like publishing brand. Yeah. And once I kind of set my mind to something, like I get very determined to do it. So,
well, that was good timing, a good time to branch out into self-publishing. So that was excellent.
Yeah. And I also freelance as well. So it's kind of, I do 50-50, like publishing my own books. And pre-pandemic, I was traveling around with them to different shows and stuff. And then I was also sort of helping other authors and creative people with all aspects of their publishing, because in doing this, I've picked up a lot of skills. So I'm self-taught at a lot of like the technical side, even like website design and now like podcast editing, like all of that stuff, plus like laying out books, anything that's like about publishing in and around publishing. It's like, I have all those skills. So why not also capitalize on that as well? So yes, it's good to be versatile.
Yeah, very, very smart. So
thank you.
Well, what is your definition of success?
That is something that has changed for me over the years. I would say at the beginning, it was publish a book. And then it was like, be recognized in some way, like have somebody tell you that, they love your books. And over the years, it was more like, oh, make this much money at a show or meet these sales goals. I think now, in the sort of coming out of the pandemic, knock on wood, era, I feel like my focus has turned more inward. At the end of 2019, I was very, very burnt out. And so I feel like I've spent these last 2 years trying some different things in around my publishing and sort of still doing my freelance work while I'm kind of waiting for these shows to come back. And my definition of success for the pandemic was come back to being in love with writing again, because I was very just... When you are doing, I was doing, 13, 15 shows a year, which by the way, is not a lot compared to some of my artist friends who do like 30 to 40 shows a year. But they're not selling books. They're selling like art prints, which is a bit different. They would travel like a lot. It's a little more difficult when you have heavy books to travel very far, but I got a lot of different things happened leading up to the end of 19 where I was just very burnt out. And I was just like, who am I? Like, why am I doing this? And it becomes very easy to forget like just who you are and why you're doing it. When you end up feeling a bit like a sales robot, when you're in that season of like, I'm only selling books, I'm here to sell. And it's a very strange feeling to kind of dissociate a little bit from your body, and you kind of feel beholden to this 10 by 10 space that you're in. And you're like, I have to sell these books and I'm here to do that. And I'm very good at it and it's happening. But inside you just like, you start to feel so hollow. And so I feel like these last few years it forced me to stop, doing this very aggressive sales. And now I feel like I've fallen back in love with my craft. I'm ready to focus on that and try and find maybe a more sustainable way of doing the show so that it doesn't ruin my body and my mind. I think that's what was happening to me.
Yeah. I think a lot of us are at that point. Like, I think 2020, 2021 kind of pushed us to the point where we're like, okay, it makes you think through everything. And why am I doing this? And do I want to keep doing it? So yeah, very true. And we're going to come back to selling in person. We have a lot of questions about that. So, but first, what do you wish you'd known about writing your craft?
I wish that I had known more about outlining when I started. I'm very much a writer who, like, I will see the scenes in my mind and then I'll kind of write them down, and I will write out of order. Often I'll do like middle, end, beginning, and then kind of stitch it all together. But over the last couple of years, I've really come to appreciate an aggressive outline because it was just becoming too stressful to try and like create a book. I mean, I still write out of order with the outline, but at least with the outline, I can go to a specific part and a specific scene. And I know this is going to be happening in this scene. And if I need to change something, I can do that very quickly in an outline and then reflect that in the actual text. But yeah, I wish I had gotten more into outlining earlier. I feel like I would have saved myself a lot of stress.
Yeah. Well, so how long did it take you to figure out how to outline? And do you outline the same way now as when you first started outlining?
I feel like I'm more aggressive with my outlines now. I feel like my outlining journey, now I don't know what year this would have been, but I bought the book Take Off Your Pants by Libby. Yeah.
Libby Hawker. Yeah.
Yes. And reading that, I was just like, okay, like this is really speaking to me. Like this is, I get it. I get it now. So I feel like with every book, I've leaned a little bit harder on her method of outlining and just feeling my own outlining process out. So I'll be a little bit more aggressive each time with each book, but I will still kind of fall a little bit back on my pants ways because I just get so excited and I'm just like, I'm going to write this scene now. I'm going to write what I feel. Right. And I'll still do that, but then I'll just have to go back to the outline and be like, okay, but like we have to probably take this out or edit it down or rewrite it in a different way. So
yeah, that is interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people come to outlining later, like they start pantsing. So how different is your finished product from your outline?
That's a good question. I think that it's getting closer and closer to the outline with every project that I do. I feel like with I have this fantasy serial podcast, Wing Torn, which I'm basically making an audiobook like chapter by chapter and releasing it as a podcast. That's essentially what it is. And that I very aggressively outlined because, I get to the point where I'm kind of writing this scene by scene and releasing it. So I have to know like what is happening,
where you're going. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that is usually quite close to the outline. But if I make a change, I have to remember that and make sure that that's in the outline. So that I'm pretty strict with my books. I mean, it's a little bit looser. I think certain things still come up in the text when I'm just freely writing, where I'm just like, oh, you know what, that actually does make a lot of sense. And so then I just have to make sure I sit with that and go back to the outline and make sure that that's all good.
Yeah. Well, you're brave to podcast as you're going along. That's I'm too much of a chicken to do that. So that's awesome.
Thank you. It's a whole process.
I imagine. Yeah. Well, what about marketing? What do you wish you'd known about marketing?
Oh boy. so many things.
Yeah.
I think like at the very base level, I had this assumption that just because I made something, me, Claire, that people would automatically like it, buy it. I think that just comes from having, very supportive upbringing. Everything is, you made it. That congratulations, you did it.
Yay.
Yay. But in the real world, like nobody cares. And
right. Yeah.
And something that I've had to learn is like, it's up to me to make people care. No one is going to advocate for me like me. No one is going to sell my books like I'm going to sell my books. And that's up to me to make the person not apathetic, because people are generally pretty apathetic about things. And it's up to me to present things in a way that makes it easy for people to understand, easy for people to care about my work, and easy for people to decide, yes, this is for me. No, this is not for me.
Yeah. So basically boiling it down to simple choices, would you say, for people? Or
yeah, and just making it like I guess I could equate this, we're going to talk about this soon, selling in person. Like you have to, you learn very quickly how people react to your display, and you have to notice those reactions so that next time you can maybe iterate the display in a way that is easy. So for example, like people will come into my booth and I have a very colorful, very bold display, and I sell, YA, sci-fi fantasy. And so people will come in here, and if they're not really familiar with books, which often I'm telling people who, aren't, the color purple is very prominent in my branding. So a lot of the older generation will be like, oh, purple equals girls. Purple equals for girls. So I have to, and this, you kind of have to be like, you have to be not afraid to challenge people a little bit on their assumptions too, is like the other side of this. Cause I will be like, well, girls and boys and people of any gender can read my books. And the line that I used to use on people was, well, girls read Harry Potter, and Harry Potter has a boy protagonist. So therefore, boys can read my books with girl protagonists.
Right. It is not limited. Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of makes them go like, oh, okay. Yeah. But just different people, you learn what people will react to, and you also learn how to deal with their reactions in a kind of quietly graceful way, so that you can pivot the conversation to, a sales conversation, or gracefully allow them to exit your booth.
Yeah. I think that's a skill that you have to, some people have that naturally, but I think that is something that if you can learn to do that, it's a great thing. I have a hard time with sales in person. So
it's definitely something you learn with practice, because I consider myself to be an introvert. But I feel like different circumstances in my life have forced me to be, on stage. Like I was a musician growing up, so I would perform. So I learned this is how you be on stage. I worked in for a musical tour when I was in university. So even though like the thought of doing it filled me with dread, like standing up and singing in front of people, even though I'm not really a singer, you do it and you learn. And then your brain kind of learns, okay, well, that wasn't so bad. Or if it does go terribly bad, there's another tour coming around in 30 minutes. So you're just going to have to do better next time, because That's just what you have to do. And so with every experience, you learn and you get better.
Yeah. You mentioned the word performance. Do you feel that selling in person is a bit of a performance? Do you have to like get in that mindset to do it?
Absolutely. Good question. Yes. So the days are long generally when I'm selling, especially at higher end craft sales. It's like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. or whatever. And so I do have, like, on the train or however I'm getting there, I have to, get into a mindset of like, this is what you're here to do today. I don't necessarily talk to myself about sales goals, because then you can descend into a like desperation and
like a spiral, and you just go down.
Yeah. And people can sense desperation on you, and you do not want to seem desperate for sales ever.
Okay.
So it's mostly, I have to focus on what is making me happy right now, and focusing on all of the good things that have happened to me recently or at the show, what's going well. Try not to think about all of these other bad things, because it does get very easy when you step onto the floor and you look at everybody else's booths, especially at, again, these higher end craft sales that I was doing. Like, these booths, they look like Etsy has been like a chic. It's chic. It's everything is just very together about them. And you're just like, well, here I am with my books, and oh God, like, I hope somebody buys them. But again, like, you can't let yourself go into that. Like, I'm there, like you said, to perform. I am on all like the whole time that I am there. And fortunately, with these shows, you don't have a lot of downtime, especially at the busy craft show. There's always somebody coming in, and I'm always engaging people to come into my booth. So there becomes no time to think about, the what ifs that can spiral you down. And I do find more often than not, people are very polite and friendly, and that helps keep me in a good mood. And when I'm in a good mood, then I can sell.
That is very interesting. Yeah. So we will come back to this again, but we'll finish the questions kind of about the writing, and then we'll come back to the craft, because I have a lot of things. There's a lot of questions bobbing around in my mind now. So what assumptions did you make at the beginning of your writing career, and looking back, did they turn out to be right or wrong?
What assumptions? Well, definitely that I would be famous, famous, like right away from the first book.
That optimistic outlook that we all have.
Yeah. And, I think there is kind of this narrative of like first time authors who make it really, really big, and you really hope that will be you.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah.
Yeah. But really, that's like hoping you'll win the lottery. Right. So that's definitely an assumption that I have. I think an ongoing assumption that I have to remind myself that is, just not always the case, is I always think that I'm going to be braver than I am, or more like on the ball than I actually am. Cause I tend to I tend to write down a lot of goals for the year. And it's just, I end up writing down too many projects or things, because we all have bad days. And especially during a pandemic, like it's been pretty rough. And so your mental health is not always going to be peak performance every single day that you can achieve every single task. So that's something that I still deal with, the assumption that I can do everything every day, all of the time. when really, like, just writing a book is an accomplishment. And I think that's very easy for us to forget.
Yes. It becomes normal. We normalize it after a while. And then if they're a little bit harder to write, some of them are harder than others. And you're like, why is this so hard? But just writing any book is difficult. So
Yeah.
Totally get that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we also like to talk about mistakes and lessons learned. So do you have either like a mistake that turned out to be a good thing, or do you have something that you thought was just amazing and then it turned out to be not so great? So do you have anything in either of those categories?
Yeah. So I do have a mistake that I made that I ended up salvaging, and so that it wasn't terrible. So when I think it was 2016, maybe 2017, 2016 is when I got serious about selling at shows and conventions. And I was like, I'm going to book a show in Ottawa, which for the non-Canadian listener is our capital. And I had never been to Ottawa before, but I decided to do an Ottawa show because Ottawa is pretty affluent. And I also have family there. So I was like, well, I can go stay there and I can check out this show and do it. And I'm so great. Like, I'm going to do so great here. I got very excited. But I also decided I'm going to ship books to the show in advance because, that's what all like the bigger vendors do. And I'm not going to take all this like on a plane with me. So I thought, I looked on the website and I was like, I think this is the right address to send books to. And I even called, but the question that I asked them was, is the address on the website the right address to send books to? And the person on the other end was like, yep, but no follow-up questions were asked. So I sent multiple boxes to this address. And at the time I was doing a show the previous weekend. So I took a box or two with me in my suitcase and did a show in Regina and then flew to Ottawa. And I spent the week there with my family, getting to know my cousins that I hadn't really met before. And it was having a nice time. And then I show up on the Friday and we're setting up, and I had like a box or whatever with me. And I had most of a display with me. And I'm checking my phone. I'm checking, be like, where are the rest of my books? And I look on the tracking number for the shipment and it said, return to sender, because because turned out it was the wrong address. It was the address for like some other thing that is related to the show, but not a receiving address. And in my body, I was just like, oh no, this is the worst. I've spent a lot of money to come here. Like, not only that, I have family that are here that are like, watching me. And like, I want to show them that like, this is my work. Like, this is my business. You do get this like imposter syndrome where you're like, I have to show them that I'm, legit and this is real. And I was so embarrassed. And I spent the show opened and I'm just here with like not a lot of stock, like at all, just like leftovers from the previous show, basically. And I'm just on the phone with Canada Post being like, where are my books? And I was mortified. And at show opening, especially actually at a show like Ottawa, there's a lot of people there. So people were coming to the table and I'm trying to be on and graceful and sell what I have. But I was just like, oh no, like this is awful. And I said to my cousin there, like, I think maybe I should just shut this table down and like, we can just go back to your parents' place because like, there's no way like that I'm even going to make any money at this show. Right. Like I'm done. And she's just like, well, you came all this way. Like, I don't know if you should really like shut everything down. And I was just spiraling. But that night I sold almost everything that I had. I had a few books left, but I was just like, you know what? She's right. I came all this way. I need to figure out how to make this work for me. So I don't lose a lot of money.
Right. Yeah.
And so, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade and you sell lemonade. So what I decided to do is I took orders at the table, and that ended up working really well.
Very smart. Yeah.
Thank you. Because people told me, I explained to them, I've sold everything that I have. I kept one copy of every book to show. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I've sold everything that I have here, and these are my books. And if you are interested in them, I'm taking orders. People, no further explanation required for people. They were just like, oh, that's great. I don't want to carry around books anyway. And I said that I would, if they spent over $30, I would ship to them for free. And for most people, totally fine. That's 2 books or whatever. So that ended up working really, really well. And so I just fulfilled those orders when I got back home, and I didn't lose money. So I turned around the show and made it I guess a success in a way.
Yeah. No, I would say that's a success because, and there's got to be something too about I've sold out of everything. Maybe people are like, oh, I better get in on this and see what this is.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You're right. And that happens even when I will run out of stock of a particular book. Mm-hmm. I've had people come, like a woman come and buy the last copy of the first book in a series when another person has hummed and hawed all weekend. And so I do tell people, if I think something is going to sell out, I do use that line, it will sell out.
Yeah. If you want your copy today or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. That is a great idea do you still take orders when you sell in person?
If I think that the stock is running low on something, I will offer an order option. Like if I only brought a couple of books in book 3 of a series, something like that, I will do that. The other reason I would do that is if I'm doing a pre-order for something. I've done that in the past because I have regulars now who would come to my table and be like, when's the next book coming out? And so to capture that interest immediately, I will have an order option, which I think works pretty well.
Yeah. Sounds good to me. Yeah. Well, what about mindset? You've already talked a little bit about COVID and all this that's gone on. Is that the biggest mindset change you've had, or have you had other ones?
Yeah. I do think that a lot of the mindset changes I've had have been around it's not all about me, and trying to make people care about the work is really on me. I think the other kind of change that I've had is I think I went to the very opposite end of the spectrum of no one cares about my work. And so I kind of got into this, and this is something that I still, I think, struggle with, is I might not post updates on social or newsletter or anywhere else because I just get into this mindset of, well, no one cares about what I'm doing. So and I don't think I'm necessarily doing anything interesting, even though I'm writing a book or doing YouTube or whatever. Yeah. And I just make an assumption that nobody cares about it, when that is just not true, because you don't know who's out there watching. And just because people aren't commenting or liking your social post does not mean that they are out there waiting for your next book or waiting for some kind of update on what you're doing. So I try to make more of an effort to remember that there are people out there who do care about what I do, even if I think that it's, this week I spent the week outlining and I might think that's nothing, because it's kind of normal, but to a fan, that might be interesting. So maybe I should write about it. So I'm trying to be a little bit more open about my process, no matter if I think it's quote unquote boring.
Yes. Well, we tend to discount the things we're familiar with or the things that we do and we enjoy. Like, it's like, oh, I spent, this, the other day I researched like sleeves on women's clothes, for like my historical. And that's something that people who enjoy historicals would be interested in that, even though it seems like it's kind of like, it's just research. But, anything can be interesting if they're interested in the books and interested in you. So we tend to forget that, though. So that's a really good point. Well, so let's dig into selling in person a little bit more. So I have a couple of questions that have just come up as we've been talking. So tell us about, you said you sell it at craft shows. So tell what that is. And is that, there's all kinds of things there, not just books, right?
Yeah. So there are different kinds of shows, and at craft shows specifically, they're maker shows. So anybody who makes something, whether that's handmade or they, design and oversee the manufacturing, that would be at a craft shows. In Canada, generally the shows that I do that are craft shows, the things have to be made in Canada to qualify, or at least, designed significantly in Canada. So you kind of have to prove that. And that would be different for everybody. I've never had to prove it. I just had to say, my books are printed in Canada. Yeah. I'm in Canada. I'm a Canadian author, and that's generally enough. There aren't very many other people who sell books at these craft shows that I do. I've seen like a couple here and there. It's mostly jewelry, people making custom jewelry, clothes. Those are like two of the biggest categories, like handmade cards, like high-end stuff like
candles, things like that.
Yeah. Anything that falls under the make it, grow it sort of umbrella would be at a craft show. And usually these shows, like I said, I call them high-end because the booths are quite expensive. The design and the look and the feel, like you have to send pictures with your application with like, here's previous examples of my displays at other shows. And when I started doing these larger craft shows, that in some ways it felt like I was starting all over again, because I was used to doing comic conventions where your displays are very loud. And I mean, my display is pretty colorful and loud anyway, but like you have more space to work with usually at these craft shows, and you have to show up even more elevated. Like you can't just, put stuff on a table, and you have to have some form of flooring, and it will be a good idea to have some lights, and just there's more considerations when you're doing these higher end shows. And they notice when you make an effort. And at least with the shows that I was doing, there's this one big company that does like 20 different shows across the country. And so like, if you can kind of prove that you're ready to play with the big boys, then they notice and they put you in more shows, essentially.
Okay. Yeah. So basically you have to apply, and you need like it's kind of staging. It sounds like you need like decorations. I don't know how to call it.
Yeah. So it depends on what you're selling, but for books, the process is you apply. So for Christmas shows, the early application deadline was just at the beginning of this month. So already at the beginning of the year, you're thinking about Christmas. Yeah. So I did all those applications. You have to submit, at least for these larger craft shows. I wrote like a statement of craft where I talk about like, this is who I am. This is what I do. I had to send a resume this year, which was new. I'm just like, I've worked for myself for like 12 years.
I'm the best employee ever.
Yeah. But I was just like, I know that they know who I am because I've exhibited with them before, but I did all this anyway. I wrote out all the shows that I've done. I had to submit high quality images of my product. So if I were doing jewelry, high quality image of a jewelry, but it's books. So I submitted a mix of like more professional pictures of my books mixed with some like kind of bookstagram type content. So they can kind of choose what they want to use there. And then I had to take a picture of myself in my workspace, which I'm just like, computer. But you, for newer exhibitors, you do have to submit like kind of how you plan to lay out your booth. And so I just submitted previous pictures of my display. But yes, so for these higher end shows, you have at least, well, there's different size of space, but generally I go for like a 10 by 10 feet space. So you have to bring your own tables to these larger shows, or you can rent them at the place. I have a lot of tips on like how to display books. I don't know if you want to hear about those now, but I have some shelving units and I've sort of experimented with different ways to do that. But essentially they're like wooden boxes that are artfully arranged and everything is sort of like a bookshelf.
So they're not just laying on the table.
Oh my goodness, you do not want to do that. I want to stress. So let me stress that here. To me, laying books flat, if all of your books are laid flat on a table, to me personally, that looks like a yard sale. And that is not the message that I want to put out into the world. So I will have a couple of books that are laid flat. Those are for people who want to read through them, touch them. That's fine. But otherwise, books are stacked on shelves, like the ones that are behind us on our bookshelves, or they are stacked like flat on a table, like on top of each other.
Laying flat, you can see the spines and everything.
So that you can see the spine. And then I might have one on top that is perched upright, just like this as a display.
Right.
Because you do not want to have to me personally, that just signals yard sale. That might not be the case for everybody. And I understand, but I don't want to look cheap.
Well, and if you're in an area with these other elaborate booths, then you kind of want to blend in. You don't want people to come by and go, oh, these are obviously not as expensive as some other things here.
Yeah.
You know, nice.
Yeah. And I basically want to look as much like a bookstore as possible. So that's sort of where I take my cues, for better or worse. People do come into the booth and they're like, did you write all these books? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, I thought it was a bookstore. And I'm like, okay, well, that is sort of the vibe that I'm going for here, because I want to exude like these books are for sale. They're professional, but I did write them all. Yeah.
Well, so let's see, that brought up a couple of questions that I've thought of. So, about stock, like how much do you bring? Because, and do you, like, you have multiple series. So do you bring all your series? How do you figure all that out?
Yeah. So that's the golden question. And it depends on the show, and I keep track in my spreadsheet, like, okay, I sold this much last year, so I should bring at least that plus 20 to 30% more, because you don't want to picture this, walking into a bookstore and the shelves are empty. That looks like you don't want that. So you have to bring at least the amount that you believe you're going to sell, plus enough for like stocking purposes to make it look like, you're a store, because you are a store for those 3 days. You're a store. I would have a busy period. You have busy periods during the day. And usually that's from like 10:30 to 2:00 would be like your first busy period. So during that time, I don't have a lot of time to restock things, which I do like to do between customers as much as possible. So I was like really busy selling. And then I finished my restocking. It was towards the end of the busy period. And I engaged a man to come into the booth because it looked like he was interested. And he kind of looks around and he's like, "You're not selling very much, are you?" And I was like, "Oh my God." I take great pains to make my booth look like fully stocked, because I know the feeling that the readers get when they come into a bookstore or to a place of books, and they want to be surrounded by that. Like they don't want to see those bare shelves. So yeah.
So it's a catch-22, right?
Yes. But you should always bring much more than you think, but weigh that against, how you're traveling, because that's the other factor as well. If assuming that you are, traveling to the show, and like for my local shows, I have the ability to bring basically as much as I want. I can restock, no problem. Mm-hmm. But if I'm going away to a show, I have to measure against like, how much am I going to ship in advance? And like, how much can I fit in my suitcase? And like, how heavy is this going to be? And is it going to really be worth it?
Right.
And I've started kind of leaving in shows that I know that I'm going to return the next year. And if I have a friend, I will leave stock there. And so then I can just draw from that. But you will begin to have a sense of how much to bring. But the short answer is, if it's your first time, bring as much as possible, and bring as much as possible from everything that you have. Mm-hmm. And you might end up selling, you'll get a feel depending on the show, like what series you're going to sell more of or less of. And if you have a new book in one series, then bring a little bit more of that series, because maybe that's the series that you're going to be pushing a little bit more. So that's a long answer for it depends, and bring everything.
And I mean, I think it's one of those things that you would just have to you'd have to learn as you go, right? What you need and what people are drawn to at that certain show. So,
yeah.
Well, so talk to us a little bit about like selling. Like, I think that's something that, most authors are introverts. We hate the idea of selling. I've done plenty of book signings where, it is like a performance. I feel like you've talked about that, how like you have to kind of get into this thing where you're willing to engage with people and you want to. So tell us your tips on how to engage with people and draw them in and interest them in your books.
Yeah, for sure. So selling is the byproduct of making somebody comfortable in your space. And how people reach that level of comfort is going to be different depending on their personality or the kind of person that they are. And you'll learn very quickly. Depending on the person, how to kind of read body language and cues. There are certain things that I look for. So what I will do is I will engage people. I don't just sit there or stand there watching people go by. Like, I will say, if you even kind of look at my booth, or if you are a person who, like, I think you're my target audience, or I think you're in the audience who is like a parent of my target audience, I'm going to engage you. Now, I might be wrong about like whether they're interested or not, but I'm still going to do it, because more often than not, I'm right. So I'm going to take that gamble. So what I do is just, I say, hello, how are you? I'm just very friendly. And I put that out into the world. Now, how they react to that will tell me what I do next. So if they are equally as exuberant, if they're stopping, if they're looking at my books and I'm like, oh, look at this. And if they're openly interested, then that's a good sign. They're probably a little more extroverted. And sometimes those people, they will just ask questions of you. And so that's easy. You just answer the questions and direct them towards whatever book you think that they need or want, and sell it that way. But people who aren't showing as open of an interest, but you still think they might be interested, and how you tell is like they've stopped, they're looking, but they might be confused about what's on offer. They might just be overwhelmed because, especially at like comic conventions, it's noisy. There's a lot of visual noise happening. And like, I have people who will look at my space, and I know it's weird to say, but it's like, they don't even know that there are books there. They might just see the word fairy, and my press name is Fairy Ink Press, Fairy. And so people see fairy and they're like, oh, like new age tarot cards. Like they go that direction. They don't even recognize that there are books on the table. So you kind of have to learn to, I mean, it's kind of funny, but you do learn to sort of forgive and be like, no, these are books, and just sort of remind people. But for the more introverted crowd who you think that they might be interested, but it's just they're not engaging because they're not comfortable with that kind of interaction, you have to go to their level. And so if they don't really reply to me, but they still seem interested in the books, all I will say to them is, this is my science fiction series over here, and this is my fantasy series over here. And maybe depending on the booth configuration, I might hand them a book. And that's really important to that they touch the work and have it in their hands, because if they touch it, they're more likely to buy it. So if they accept that, that's fine. But if they're very, very quiet, then I'll just sort of indicate and I will leave them alone. And you will learn to be comfortable with silence. And I know that's hard for some people to be comfortable with silence, but it's best. And it's hard too when you're in such a tiny, cramped space and there is another person like right here, like looking at your stuff. It can be really hard to quote unquote ignore them. But you do have to sort of switch off of them and leave them alone, let them make their own decisions. Because I have had this happen where an introverted person, a quiet person will come in, I just be like, fantasy there, and they go to the fantasy and they stay there for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I don't know how long it is. I have one person who was like right in front of me at a table, and my cousin and I were just like standing there, like you kind of end up just like staring at them, but you're trying not to like look at them, trying not to engage them. And he was there for like a really long time. And I'm just like to her, like, don't say anything, just quiet. And he looks at me and he's like, I'll take all of the books.
I knew you were going to say that. I was like, because I'm an introverted shopper. So it's like, I want to be left alone and I'll make my decision. And, I'm a book lover, so I'm probably going to get a lot of books, Yeah. So that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you do? Like, so I've done signings where it's like you have people who are interested in writing and publishing, and they're not really interested in buying your book, but there are other people there who are actually book shoppers. And the people who are interested in asking you questions can take up a ton of your time. So how do you handle that?
Yeah. So I've been pretty fortunate that these people get that like you're busy and you don't have time to answer their questions. So they will usually come back. Okay. And when I'm less busy, and I'm very happy and excited to answer any questions. And I like doing that during the downtime because having somebody at the booth is a plus, because if one person is at the booth, that's going to attract more introverts to come. Like, that's just a bonus. So I don't know if I've ever had, I think maybe I've had to tell one person, but I think they also kind of got it. Like, people are generally pretty good at being like, I'll just come back later and you can answer my questions. And I'm happy to do that. But I think it just becomes very obvious that, like, I'm selling, people are buying, people are giving me money. Like, I don't have time for you.
Oh, so speaking of that, that's another question, is about the like checkout. Like, you're handling the payments, right? So how do you do that? Do you do credit card stuff? How do you do it?
I do it all. So yeah, that was an evolution as well. So at the very, very beginning, I only did cash. I actually had a mug on my first show where I put money in the mug, and I was just like, okay, well, I need a cash box. So at first it was just cash. Then I don't know what all technology you have down there, because I know payment processing is different in the States. And if I may say so, slightly behind. Like, did you only just get Tap? I know that when I was,
it's been a while, but not that long. So
yeah. So Tap is very common up here. So there are different companies that offer like credit card processing, like Square. I don't know. You probably have that. And Square has evolved over the years. It used to be just this tiny little literal white square that you plug into your phone and it swipes. So that was like the first thing that I got. But debit cards, very common up here. So eventually, what I ended up getting for a long time was I actually went direct to a major like credit card processing company, and they had sort of the lowest tier of credit card processor that you pay a monthly fee and you get the machine and that processed the payments. The reason I did that and I didn't go fully with Square, which most artists do use, they didn't have the ability to take debit at the time. And that's a
big deal, right?
That's a pretty big deal. So I did it. And at these higher end craft shows, I have a lot of like grandmothers and older folks who like, they don't have, I don't want to explain to them, oh, I only take this credit card. Because again, before Square would only do certain credit cards and maybe not American Express. Like, there's just like a whole minefield. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with that. I want to take all the cards, and that's that. So for a while I was using my little tiny, it looked like an old calculator, but it was very durable. It was great. It literally took every single card. I never had to decline anybody. But now, because of the pandemic, I stopped doing that and I bought myself. Square has finally evolved and they have more advanced machines now. So I bought, I think it was like a $300 machine that takes debit and credit and just everything. And it's just an account. Square takes there's a processing fee, and there's like a very small, I think there's like a credit card fee. There are little fees, but it's basically, it's very, very small. And that's what I use to take payments.
Yeah. Well, so what would you say to somebody who is debating this? Like, is it worth it to sell? Basically, you're selling direct in person, right? Is it worth it to take the time to go to the shows and order your stock and all that? Obviously, it's worked well for you, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it's tough. It depends on your situation too. And like the cost of your stock and getting all of that together. Is your show local? Do you have to travel for it? You have to consider all of your expenses before you even attempt this. I do think that you should try it at least once so that you get a sense of what it's going to be like, because, yes, consider your expenses, but also consider that this is probably at least 3 days of your life that, and the toll that it's going to take on your mind and your body. Like, are you willing to stand there and have people openly judge your work? And to be fair, most people are very polite. I've had some mean and bad interactions, but mostly people are very kind, and mostly people are going to be very interested. And like we were saying, like the baseline, like for us, writing a book is normal, but to the rest of the world, writing a book is like a dream that people
like you're a fascinating creature. They're like, tell us how you did this.
Yes. So are you willing to withstand the good and the bad of really physically putting yourself out there with there's no divider, like there's nothing between you and the audience? And for me, like that interaction where somebody gives me money and I give them the book, like that's like a high. Almost like I don't do drugs. I don't know anything about drugs, but that's what I imagine. Like it's kind of addictive. You get that rush of like, I made something and somebody else bought it and they're probably going to like it. And then of course the next year, them coming back and telling you I did like it, it's just like compounds. And so that's, if you're that kind of person that, you want that direct validation, and that works for you, then I do suggest trying this, a couple of times to see if that's going to fit into your life. And it does sort of become a bit of a lifestyle. Like I was doing, the many, many shows in a year, and I would plan my year around these shows, so much to the point where I got very burnt out of it. But like in the pandemic, I ended up missing that direct validation. And I was talking to my best friend about it and how like I was feeling, coming towards Christmas time when I would be traveling quite a lot for these shows. I was like, I feel like I don't know why I'm doing this. Like, I feel really sad about all of my work. And she's like, you're used to people telling you like, that they like this work and that it's helped them or whatever. You're missing that direct validation, that cycle that helps you continue.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, it seems like it would be direct feedback. That like most of the time we don't get that. Like you're saying about like the color associations and the things that you would learn a lot about the people who actually buy your books by interacting face to face. That a lot of interactions that we don't get if we just sell online.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Really interesting. Well, what, like if somebody's interested in this, give us like maybe 2 or 3 things that would be good first steps for looking into this.
Yeah. So the first step is look at all the local shows in your area, or like if you kind of live around a couple of major cities, look at like the major cities, what, if you're selling sci-fi or whatever, like what your local Comic-Cons are, just local specialty shows that you think your books might be a fit for. So I've done a couple like anime shows, which are sort of akin to Comic-Cons. And I think they kind of work. So anything that you think your books would be good for, Christmas markets. I've even tried farmers markets for good or better or worse. So anything that you think might be suitable to sell books at, that would be like a first step to just kind of write all of those shows down and pick one that you think would be, that best fits your budget or that you can easily get to or isn't too big of a slog to do. Choose that one to start. The second thing I would suggest is start thinking about how you would want to display your books. So a couple of items that I would suggest that you buy are a nice tablecloth. A lot of like Comic-Cons do give you an actual table, and some of them will skirt the table in some way, but you probably want to bring your own nicer tablecloth that's maybe branded or just at least a nicer color that would fit. Right. A lot of these places have like an ugly blue or just something that doesn't quite fit what maybe your books are,
right.
And appropriate signage. I would suggest designing something on the computer and printing it off and putting it in a plastic holder that you can display. You can never have enough signage because, again, people they're not going to know what it is that you're selling. So make it really, really obvious. I have books at least 7 times around and young adults. And even though you have those things, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to make that connection
right
in the brain, but do have them there. You might want to invest, if you are a little bit more serious about it, you might want to invest in an upright banner. I think those are about $120, probably cheaper in US dollars. But if you are a little bit serious about showing up in a little slightly more elevated way, a banner is a good idea. One that stands up on its own. You don't have to attach to anything. Those are the things that I would suggest for a display. And then a third thing, other than having, appropriate technology to capture as many payments as you possibly can, showing up with the right attitude is important. I trying not to be too defeatist about yourself, and at least show up with the feeling I am going to sell something today, and there are going to be people here that will like my books, or I'm going to have a conversation today that's going to change the way people look at me, or I'm going to have a nice conversation with somebody about my books. Always go with the goal of having conversations and less about having particular sales goals. Because if you have meaningful conversations with people, that will lead to sales.
Yeah. And you may open people's minds that they can read, their grandkids can read certain books that maybe they didn't think they could read, even though they have a purple cover or whatever.
So, that's right. Yes.
Well, thank you for all of that. That has been excellent. So we always like to ask, what is the best thing that you think you've done to set yourself up for success? It's a big question.
The best thing that I have done. Oh, yes. So for selling in person specifically, one thing that I have done is I started writing these, what I was calling postmortems or blog posts about my experiences selling books. And it just kind of started as here are all the things I learned by selling at this one show. But it became a kind of tradition for me to write a blog post after every show that I ever did. And I think that, people did start reading them, and people in the community appreciated my insights. But besides that, the actual act of reflecting on everything that happened to you, all of the experiences, the things that went right, the things that went wrong, it became a kind of I need to get a better banner next time because my banner fell on somebody and that's not good. Or just you learn by reflecting on everything that's happened, and that allowed me to grow.
Yeah.
And that just that, I think, really, really did help me quite a lot. And it also established me as somebody who's serious about doing shows, and people notice when you show up better than before. And so that also became my goal, showing up better, a little bit better than the previous year, or a little bit better at each show, so that I could just continue to reach more and more people. And don't just think that when you show up to a show, the same show 3 times, that, the same people will notice, but you will also get new people every time, because there's always new people going to the shows. There are people that might not find you at a show because the show is so large. You're always going to find new people and have new experiences and get new insights every time you do it. So,
yeah. Well, that is fantastic. All right. And I think that's really true. A lot of times we need to slow down and reflect, and that just taking a little time is very, very good thing to do. So, all right. Well, where can people find out more about you and your books?
Sure. So My website is fairyinkpress.com, FAERYINKPRESS.com. That's where I sell my books direct on my website, and you can check out my postmortem blogs. They are all there as well. You can go back and look at pictures to when I just started doing shows, when I had not as nice a display, and you can see my evolution and see how I grow and learn from that. And go do that.
Okay. All right. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. And we'll have all the links at wishidknownthenpodcast.com. And thanks to Alexa Larberg for editing and producing the podcast. And thanks to Adriel Wiggins for doing the admin. We'll see y'all next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. We hope this episode inspired you, empowered you, and made you laugh a little bit too. If you loved it, tell your friends about it. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a review. We look forward to being with you again next week.